Welcome everyone. This is the Canadian Sociological Association Sociology Migration Research Cluster webinar titled How to Publish Books and Journal Articles on Migration, Insights from Experts. So today, the moderator of this webinar is me, Kaida. I'm the Associate Professor of Sociology at McMaster University. So first, I would like to make a land acknowledgement. While we meet here on the virtual platform, we should take a moment to recognize the importance of the land on which we are each located. We acknowledge the territory to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in building positive relationships between nations and in developing a deep understanding of indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, First Nations, and Métis peoples. So before we move on to the webinar, I have several housekeeping notes. So first, Zoom-generated closed captioning is available under
I think we're frozen, so I'll just continue. Zoom-generated closed captioning is available under live transcript. Please save your questions until after the presentations. You can use the chat feature to type in your question, or you can raise your hand if you wish to speak. During the presentations, please keep your microphones and cameras off, but you're welcome to share your screen. You're welcome to share your screen while you're asking a question. So welcome everyone. And while Lisa and Vic are rebooting their feed, I'll hold on just a second. I think Lisa's coming back. Lisa, I've finished up the housekeeping if you'd like to introduce the speakers for today. Lisa, you're muted. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I just unmuted myself. So today we have two experts who will be speaking about the experience in publishing books and editing a migration-related journal. First, let me introduce you to Dr. Vic Satzewich, who is Professor of Sociology at McMaster University, who is sitting next to me. Professor Satzewich, over the past 3 decades, he has published a number of books pertaining to immigrant integration, diaspora, racism, and so forth. He's also a long-term member of the Canadian Sociological Association. He's a recipient of the 2007 CSA Outstanding Contribution to Sociology Award. He's also the winner of the 2016 CSA John Porter Tradition of Excellence Book Award for his 2015 book, Points of Entry, How Canada's Visa Officers Decide Who Gets In. Moving on to Dr. Lori Wilkinson. She's a professor of sociology and distinguished university professor at the University of Manitoba and Canada Research Chair in Migration Futures. She's also a co-convener of the Sociology of Migration Cluster, and her research centers on the economic and social outcomes of immigrants and refugees, with a special focus on women and youth. She's a former editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Migration and Integration from 2013 to 2020. And similar to Vic, she's also a long-time committed member of the Canadian Sociological Association. She has been the Status of Women Subcommittee member, Policy, Ethics, and Professional Concerns Subcommittee member, as well as the National Committee Nomination Committee since 2004. She was also the CSA secretary in 2016 to 2020. Before we move on to the webinar, let me speak a little bit about the background of this panel as one of the co-convener of the social migration research cluster. So this webinar was made possible in response to comments from the social migration cluster members during the 2023 business meeting at the York University during the Congress. And some of the attendees, including students, emerging scholar members, suggested a professional development event focusing on publication. And in the most recent 2024 CSA annual meeting, our cluster hosted a similar panel and attracted a very large audience despite the last-minute change to the online format. And we even received some emails from the specific members thanking for this event. With this in mind, the social migration co-conveners, which are composed of Monica Boyd, Lori, and myself, thought other CSA members who couldn't make it to the panel due to time conflict might also be interested in this type of webinar. So in the next 1 hour or so, what we're going to do is to split this panel into 3 components, 3 sections. The round 1 of the panel focuses on your story of publishing books on migration, and I will address some questions to Vic. And in the second round, is about your insights as a journal editor, and I will address specific questions to Lori. And in the final round, I will ask advice for students and junior scholars who wish to publish articles as well as books based on their dissertation research. So let me move on to the the round 1, your story of publishing books on migration. And this section is the questions to Vic. So my questions to you, Vic, is, so what are the processes of publishing one's dissertation research as a book? Second, do the challenges and roadblocks unique to publishing a book differ from those of publishing a journal article? If so, what are some examples? So over to you, Vic.
Okay, thanks, Lisa, and thanks for the invitation to be part of this webinar. I've published 10 books over the years, and I'm currently co-editing another one. My first book came out way back in 1991. And over the years, I've published a mix of authored, co-authored, edited, and co-edited books. And I've also published 60 or 70 book chapters and journal articles. But what I'm going to do today is mostly talk about publishing as an author. And maybe at the end, if there's time in the Q&A, we can talk about issues associated with editing a collection, which those are a slightly different beast. And so I'm really happy to share whatever accumulated knowledge I've gotten over the years about the publication process. So let me talk about the publication process of turning your dissertation into a book, and then I'll also share some of my experiences of publishing in that context. I guess the first thing I wanted to say is that writing a dissertation is not the same as writing a book. And so when you think about it, the audience for your dissertation is basically, maybe 4 or 5 people. You want to satisfy your supervisor, your advisory committee, and obviously the external examiner on your dissertation. And in doing that, you want to obviously demonstrate a mastery over the subject matter, your mastery of theory, methods, and obviously your empirical data. The challenge, though, is that book readers don't necessarily want to know how brilliant you are and how much theory you know and how good at methods you are. And I think book readers are really more interested in the story you want to tell, that you want to tell as a result of your research. And they want to know more about what's interesting, important, and novel about what you've found. And I think they don't necessarily want to get bogged down with all of the sociological terms and concepts that we use, both theoretically and methodologically. So I think the narrative story that you want to tell is clearly more important than demonstrating your mastery of a body, different bodies of literature. And so I think the trick with turning, or one of the tricks with turning your dissertation into a book is trying to figure out what to let go of. And it takes some emotional detachment in order to know what you should let go of. And, you know, of course, everything you write is important and brilliant and necessary to your argument. At least that's what we think when we write our dissertation. But we also have to be able to know and understand what's central to the story you want to tell and what intelligent readers will actually want to know. And so I guess my first bit of advice is that when you are at the point of you've finished your dissertation, you've defended it, and now you want to transform it into a book, it's probably a good idea to forget about your thesis for at least a little while and decompress and get a little bit of distance from it. Because, you know, obviously for the previous couple of years, that's all you've lived with and you've been obsessed with that. And I think there's a lot to be said for, you know, taking a little bit of time, not too much, to sort of sit back and kind of let things percolate. So that's kind of a general comment. I think the next thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is the issue of advanced contracts. And so I think the first dilemma that you are going to face is whether you want to try and get an advanced contract for your manuscript or write the manuscript and shop it around to different publishers. So basically write the manuscript, have a complete manuscript, and then, you know, see if a publisher might be interested in pursuing it. And I've done it both ways. By the time I wrote Points of Entry, I'd already published a few books. And I kind of knew how to put together, or I thought I knew how to put together a compelling narrative. And so I decided in that context just to write the manuscript after I completed the data collection and analysis. And I didn't really want to worry about putting together a prospectus and shopping it around and spending time on it. I just kind of wanted to get going and write it up. And because I felt like I felt pretty confident that I had a pretty compelling story to tell there. And so once I finished writing the manuscript, I sent it to a publisher that I had previously worked with at UBC Press. I don't mind naming her name, Emily Andrew. I had worked with Emily on a co-edited book with Lloyd Wong on transnationalism a few years earlier, and developed a good relationship with her. I felt that she had a good, strong editorial hand. I had kind of confidence that she was an advocate for authors, which I think is important to kind of try to do. And so I sent it to Emily, and she read the manuscript, and was quite enthused about it. And then we, you know, obviously took things from there. But for someone that's starting out, I would not recommend doing that. I think that it's a really good idea for you to approach a publisher and see if you can get an advanced contract. And part of the reason why I think that's important is that a good editor can help you, can actually help you transform your dissertation into a book. They can give you advice about what to keep, what is superfluous, what's necessary to the argument, what is kind of good to have, but again, not really critical. And they can help you actually find the story that an audience can actually will be interested in. So in getting an advanced contract, you're going to end up working with an editorial team that can give you oftentimes really good advice about how to put that, how to transform your manuscript, your dissertation into a manuscript. I think one of the mistakes I made when I started is for my when I turned my dissertation into a book, I didn't have a strong editorial hand. I went with Routledge, which was quite a prestigious publisher in the late 1990s and late 1980s, early 1990s, and I think it still is. And at that time, it seemed like a lot of influential people were publishing in the areas of racism and migration. And my PhD supervisor was starting a new series, and he invited me to contribute, which was a spectacular opportunity for me that I'll always appreciate. But the problem in retrospect is that the editor at Routledge did not really exercise a really strong editorial hand. And even though the book at the end of the day was pretty well received, then I think it's still being read 30 some years later. The downside is that the first two chapters were pretty dense and in many ways pretty unreadable. I wanted to demonstrate my theoretical chops in those first two chapters, and so I brought together this kind of crazy set of literature on the transition from feudalism to capitalism, world systems theory, the place of unfree labor in capitalism, and then added theories of racism and theories of migration to the mix and tried to come up with this masterful model. And at the end of the day, nobody really liked those first two chapters. And I still remember one of the reviewers of that book. They said that yeah, the book is kind of interesting. He's found something kind of interesting, but the first two chapters were about as interesting and exciting as a Joe Clark press conference. And if any of you remember or know Joe Clark, it wasn't a compliment. And so with a stronger editorial hand, I think I would have toned those first two chapters down quite a bit to make the narrative more central to the argument. Anyway, we live and learn. So if you do decide and do pursue an advanced contract, I think the first hurdle is you want to put together a prospectus that any publishers can ask you to put together a prospectus. So let me say a few things about the prospectus and the importance of the prospectus. And basically, it's kind of an 8, 10, 12 page document where you're basically trying to sell your idea or the book to a publisher. And so, if you go to most publishers' websites, U of T Press, McGill, Queens, UBC, they'll sort of have the specifications of what to include in the prospectus. But basically, you want to have kind of an introductory section about what your book is about, what's the story you want to tell, what is new and what is different, and what's important about what you found. So kind of a 1 or 2 page, statement about what it's about. Titles are important. Again, it's something that I learned over the years, but my first book, had the great title of Racism and the Incorporation of Foreign Labor Migration to Canada since 1945. I don't know if you could think of a worse title for a book. It's so wordy. It's just not a great title. And so I think the title is actually really important, and a good editor will help you work through what a good title is. My editor, Emily, at UBC Press, we ended up, batting around the title for a long time, trying to figure out what the right kind of message was we wanted to communicate with the title. And part of the reason why that's important is that you want your title to be picked up in various kinds of search engines. If people are doing keyword searches on the internet and using various search engines, you want to make sure that your title kind of stands out and is captured by those engines. So titles are important. You're going to have to submit an annotated table of contents, so kind of a paragraph or two about what the chapters are about. You might even have to submit a sample chapter, depending on the publisher. You have to think about the market for your book, who you think is going to read it. And so, you have to think about whether it's going to be read or of interest only to folks who are interested in sociology or specifically migration, or does it have a broader audience? Is it of relevance to an interdisciplinary audience? And if so, which disciplines? Is it relevant to political science? Is it relevant to social work, anthropology, and so on? Is it relevant? Is it going to be used for course adoptions? And if you think it's going to be useful for course adoptions, what kind of courses and at what level, like second, third year undergraduate level, graduate level? So you're going to be asked to comment about that as well. And so again, I would encourage you to look at the publisher websites to get more of the details about what to include in the prospectus. Some of you may have questions about royalties and royalty arrangements. And I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but royalties, you're generally not going to get rich unless you're Jordan Peterson, who sells like 5 million of his whatever books worldwide. The market for a Canadian academic book is pretty small, and so if your book sells over the course of its lifetime a couple of thousand copies, that would actually be kind of a pretty good seller. And so royalties with university presses are pretty tiny. I think, I haven't looked lately, but you're probably looking at, maybe 2 or 3% of net sales. So you're looking at kind of $1 or $2 maybe on every book you sell, which obviously isn't a lot. With commercial publishers, you may be able to negotiate a slightly higher royalty. But again, royalties, they're there, they exist. But like I say, you're not going to, unless you're Jordan Peterson, going to be able to retire or get that yacht that you've been planning to invest in. Maybe 1 or 2 more things, and then I'll turn it over to Lori, and then I'll maybe talk more about some of the challenges a little bit later. I think the other thing you want to pay attention to is whether the publisher is willing to is what the publisher has in terms of how the book is going to be actually published. And so traditionally the distinction that publishers make is between publishing your book in hardback only or hardback and paperback. And I'll say a little bit more about ebooks in a second. But traditionally, publishers will kind of look at your manuscript and think about whether they should publish it only in hardback or in hardback and paperback. And so when you think about it, most of the revenue that publishers derive from your book is going to be to libraries. They sell to libraries. So they purposefully initially publish your book as a hardback to sell it to libraries so they can make more profit. They're capitalists, right? They want to make money. Who doesn't? And so that's fine. The problem with hardbacks, as you know, is that they're really expensive and libraries don't really have the power or ability to negotiate the price of a hardback. They just buy it. And publishers know that. So the trick is to see whether your book will be published both in hardback and paperback. Because obviously paperbacks are less expensive. There's a bigger market for them. There's a chance that a paperback copy might be adopted in a course if it's not too expensive. And so it's something you may want to pay attention to. Now, ebooks are becoming increasingly important. I'm in conversation right now with Oxford University Press about doing a 6th edition of my Race and Ethnicity in Canada textbook. And they're thinking about doing it only as an ebook now. And I mean, I'm old. I'm an old guy and I still like paper. And so I'm not sure how I feel about a book that is going to come up only as an ebook. And I think, I mean, it's just for practical reasons. It's hard to give an ebook to your friends and family for Christmas, right? At least if you've got a paperback, your book makes a great stocking stuffer for your folks and for your brothers and sisters and relatives. So pay attention to that. There may be some negotiation around the format of the book that you want to consider. One or two more things and then I'll stop. I think it's important to remember that an advanced contract does not guarantee that the book will actually be published. So it's an advanced contract is a bit like a letter of intent, right? There's a relationship there you have with the publisher. You're benefiting from their expertise in terms of the editorial advice and that you get. But at the end of the day, the publisher can, after all of that work that you put into it, say, you know what? We don't think that the quality of the writing is good enough, or the analysis is good enough, or the reviews aren't good enough. And they can say, sorry, we're not going to publish it. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And this is why it's really important to pay attention to the reviews and referee reports that you get from your manuscript. So, you know, with a good university press, they're going to send your manuscript out to 2 or 3 referees. They're going to evaluate the manuscript for the publisher, and they're going to, you know, oftentimes offer advice about what to change, what to modify, what works, what doesn't work. And publishers take that advice pretty seriously. And so I think you should as well. And so I know the initial reaction of many of us is when we get kind of negative comments about our work, we kind of dismiss that and think, oh, these people are crazy. They don't understand really what our brilliance is. But I think once you step back and sort of let those reviews percolate, you really should take that advice pretty seriously. And so, you know, maybe I think Lori might talk about that as well in a little bit more detail for journal editors. But as with journal articles, you really do need to pay attention to the advice. And also publishers, university publishers, they seek subventions from the Aid to Scholarly Publications program in Canada, and the people who make those judgments about whether a book gets a subsidy or a subvention is also determined by a committee, and they look at your responses to the reviews as part of the decision about whether to fund the book. So it's really important. Maybe I'm getting too far into the weeds here, but maybe I'll stop there and let Lori take over. And then if there's some time, I'll talk about some of the kind of potential roadblocks and problems and other kind of bits of advice about book publishing.
Thanks, Pink. So let me move on to the next round, round two, your insights as a journal editor. So just to remind to the audience, Professor Wilkinson was the editor-in-chief for the JIMI, the Journal of International Migration and Integration, from 2013 to 2020. So my questions to Lori is, what factors or characteristics make a manuscript meritorious for sending to reviewers rather than a desk reject? Are there any threshold of a good manuscript? Over to you, Lori.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm joining all of you today from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg. We are the home of the Anishinaabe, Ininiwak, Assiniwak, Dakota Oyate, and Dene people. We are also the homeland of the Métis Nation. So I did the exact opposite that Vic did. I turned my dissertation into three, well, we probably could tell, it was 3 journal articles directly and 5 journal articles indirectly. I feel like I could speak a little bit towards the idea of turning your dissertation into journal articles, but I'll focus my talk more around what an editor of a journal is looking for. So the Journal of International Migration and Integration, which is lovingly called JIMI, is actually an interdisciplinary journal, and it's an international journal. So the audience is a little bit different, or maybe more wide, than maybe we had originally thought, when we were writing our dissertation. And the audience for JIMI is not only students and academics worldwide, but also government and policymakers. It's a very highly read journal amongst the people who do migration research. And so you have to think a little bit more broadly than sociology when you're preparing your article, because people from anthropology, political studies, even history, they'll be reading this article and might not be familiar so much with the sociological jargon that we use, and certainly not the theory that we use. So I'm not saying that we don't use theory, but we have to write for a more broad audience than, say, another article. So my first tip to you is, if you're writing for JIMI, try to keep the jargon that you use very minimal. And if you are using jargon, make sure that you have a full definition, because not everybody who's reading your article will understand what you're talking about. My second tip to you is every journal has a mandate. So the mandate of the Journal of International Migration and Integration is not only just scholarly, it's also international. So even though you might be writing about Canada, you need to think about what is the lesson or the message that you're trying to get across to the international audience. What could they learn from the Canadian situation? And there's often a lot of overlap, because Canada's not so different in terms of its migration policies and ideas and beliefs from other countries. And so thinking about how the lessons from Canada might be able to be applied outside of Canada as well. I have to tell you that when I was the editor of JIMI, we received over 1,000 papers a year. So the rejection rate was really high. And this happens to be an issue for almost all, upper level journals, that lots of people want to publish in the best journals, but very few people can publish in them. And so I had to do crazy things like, remove the book at the book review section, which I liked in the journal, but we just simply didn't have enough space. And by space, I mean not just page numbers, but just space online to publish all the worthy papers that we were accepting. And we had to get really sticky about the rules. So your paper could be excellent, but we still rejected you because it wasn't amongst the top 10% of the papers that we received. So the other tip that I want to give to you is don't lose your confidence when you get rejected from one journal, because chances are you probably could get your paper published in another journal. And pay attention to the review that you get and make the changes that are suggested. You might not like the changes. You may think that the changes are too much work, or maybe they don't understand the message that you're trying to get across. But there's a reason you got these comments, and I strongly urge you to consider these comments when you rewrite your paper and submit it to another journal, because there is, if one reviewer or two reviewers and the editor feel the same way, maybe there's something that you're missing about your analysis that you hadn't really thought about. So don't lose hope, because most of us, I've been rejected before. Vic's been rejected before. And rejection is part of that learning process. Also, I would strongly urge you to think about the start of your paper and the abstract, because the first thing that a reviewer is going to look for is, can I find your research question? And do you have a research question? Some people prefer to write their papers with a statement instead of a question. I'm a huge fan of turning that statement into a question, because why are you writing a paper if you're not answering a question? And also, the question stands out because we don't often ask questions in papers. So reviewers often have, and editors especially, have very little time to spend with your paper. And the more they have to hunt and search and look for the point of your paper, the less likely they are to accept it in the journal. My next point is that most journals want your findings to be novel and new. So it's really hard to publish a review article. So review articles should really focus on timely topics that bring together a whole bunch of literature that not only summarizes that literature, but also provides the readers with ideas about what the new directions are, what the gaps are in the existing research. Otherwise, if it's just a review and you're just summarizing stuff, I'm not going to publish it, because I'd rather read the articles myself. I can summarize information on my own. And so most journals won't take review articles. When an editor asks you for 3 to 6 reviewers, give them 6 reviewers. As an editor, I often had to ask between 20 and 40 people to review a paper. And I'm not talking about obscure topics. I'm talking about the economic outcomes of immigrants, which is the most popular topic in migration studies. And having to ask 40 reviewers and getting no for response or no response is very frustrating, and it increases the time that it takes to review your paper in the first place. So my other side point is if you get asked to review a paper, please consider reviewing it. And if you can't do it right away, just send the editor a note. And if you can, suggest a couple of other people, because that helps speed up the process enormously. And we check your papers for plagiarism. So don't even think about doing that, because if your paper is plagiarized, oh man, not only are you rejected, you're probably rejected as an author for that journal for forever if the plagiarism is bad, or for a very long time. So don't plagiarize your papers. In terms of what the threshold is, or what are the make or break elements of a good paper, polished writing, number 1. If I have trouble reading your paragraph and understanding what you're trying to say, I'm probably not going to publish it. I don't have time to kind of sort out your bad grammar in my head. The other thing is that well-polished and well-edited papers give the editor a sense of you've spent time with this work, you value this work, and you find that this work is important. And that gives a psychological comment back to the editor that this is serious work too. You're more likely to get your paper accepted if it's well written. I've already mentioned the issue about the review papers. Very few journals will take review papers. Make sure that you have unique data, but make sure that that data is highlighted, that the uniqueness of your contribution is made. That means looking at the existing research in your topic area and inserting your findings into that area. So it also makes the article easier for the editor to read and accept, but also for the people who are reading your paper to understand its novelty and its contribution. Make sure your methodology is clearly described, but make sure you read the information from the journal because it'll tell you how much information about the methodology that you need to include. Some journals ask a lot of you in terms of methodology, and they put half of it online and the other half of it in the paper. So make sure you know that ahead of time. Make sure that your theory is well articulated because there's so many theories in so many disciplines. So you have to define the theory, but also apply the theory. And by applying the theory, it means take a look at your results. Does your theory help answer the question or help us to make sense of the results? Or does it not help you? And most of the time, it's kind of in the middle. And it's your job as a writer to be able to say, you know, this aspect of the theory could be used to understand these results, but the other parts of the theory are not helpful. And so this is how we can make the theory grow. Make sure that your article has a good literature review and introduces the topic in a way that grabs the reader. Kind of like what Vic said about his boring title for his book. You need to have a device that draws people in. So even if it's a quantitative paper, I find qualitative stories and narratives help humanize the work that you're doing and help us visualize what's behind the numbers. Sorry, I just need to take a glass. Finally, because Jimmy is a policy-related journal, make sure that you think about the policy implications of your findings. What can policymakers learn from reading your research? This is a lesson I didn't learn until I was a professor. So I will tell you a short story. When I first was hired to be a professor, I was invited to go to a really big conference. There's a lot of government workers there. And I proudly produced some data that showed that immigrant children who go to after-school programs often have higher grades, often have more confidence, and often learn English or French a lot faster than their peers who don't visit after-school homework sessions. And I was so excited about this data. And so that's all I said about it. My first question from the audience was from an established government policymaker who said, well, what are we supposed to do with this data? And inside my head, I'm like, what do you mean, what are we supposed to do with this data? It seems to me like we should all set up after school programs and help young people learn English and help them with their homework. But because I didn't do that translation properly, most of the audience didn't get that. So I'm glad the question came about, but I've changed the way that I present my data ever since then. And I'd like you to think about that too, because what might be common sense to you might not necessarily be common sense to your audience. So I will pass off, that's my part of the presentation. I will pass it back to Vic and Lisa.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. This is just a message for the audience. Yeah, if you have any question during Vic's and Lori's speeches, feel free to post your questions on the chat box. And I've already seen a few questions addressed by some of the participants. So finally, let's move on to the round 3, which is about the advice for students and junior scholars. So my specific question to you, Vic, is what do you think are the common mistakes made by a junior scholar in the field of migration when they are attempting to publish their dissertation as a book? And my question to you, Lori, is to students who are trying to publish their research in the JME, what's your advice to them? So maybe Vic, do you want to start first?
Okay, I think what I'll do is I'll probably talk about 2 issues that are kind of related but separate. I think the first thing you need to be aware of is it takes a long, long time for your dissertation to be turned into a book and for it to see the light of day. The fastest I've ever had a book kind of appear from the time I finished writing it to the time it actually was published and available was probably about 20 months, or just shy of 2 years. And in the wider scheme of things, that was really fast. Normally you're looking at 2, 3, 4, if you're unlucky, 5, 6 years of having your book kind of in process. So it often takes a long time. The problem and the kind of thing you need to be cognizant of is if you're lucky enough to get a tenure track position at a college or university, the time that it takes for your book to appear in print can pose potential problems for your tenure and promotion case. Because tenure, in my experience, and I've served on a lot of different kinds of tenure and promotion committees over the years, basically tenure and promotion committees want to see how your research agenda is moving beyond your dissertation. And so if you're investing a lot of your time and effort in the first years of your academic appointment into your book and revising the dissertation into a book, it can make it look like you're not moving your research agenda along to a tenure and promotion committee. You'll be coming up for tenure in 5 or 6 years, and if the book is still being reviewed or hasn't been published or officially accepted yet, then this could be a potential flag for your tenure and promotion case. One way to try and mitigate the risk there, and Lori kind of spoke to it a little bit, is that many publishers allow you to publish some material that appears in your book as referee journal articles. And I think the publishers vary a little bit. I don't think there's a hard and fast rule, but I think the kind of rule of thumb is that like university presses like UBC Press or McGill Queen's, don't quote me, but I think they allow up to 20% of your manuscript to be previously published. So you can squeeze out 1 or 2 journal articles that form chapters of your book and still be safe. And that way you're publishing material along your tenure and promotion journey and making it obviously building up your CV that way. So that's possible, and I would certainly encourage that. And I actually did that with my dissertation and book. I think the rules about how much I could publish were a little bit looser then, and I think I published 5 out of the 7 chapters as journal articles. So it was good for me. I think the other issue is, the other concern is that you don't necessarily want to put all your eggs into one basket. And if you're investing all of that time and effort into transforming your dissertation into a book, what happens if, heaven forbid, at the end of the day, the publisher decides not to publish it, right? You've invested all of these years into that process. And if you haven't kind of pursued your broader research agenda or moved your research agenda along from your dissertation, then that can be a potential flag in terms of tenure and promotion. So it's you know, we all have it. In some ways, we all have to judge the risks of this, and there's a trade-off between journal articles, books, and the risk of having your book rejected at the end of that process. It's not high, but it's not zero either. And you have to think about, if that happens, do you have enough in your CV to convince a tenure and promotion committee to keep you on? So it's kind of a story about risk. I think the other thing, and I'll just stop after this, and I have a feeling Lori might have more to say about it, but I would say be aware of vanity presses, or what we used to call vanity presses. And so we all get emails from, you know, these journals. I get like emails from the Journal of Architectural Engineering about how interested they are in my research. And, you know, would I be interested in publishing there? And, you know, I know it's not a legitimate kind of publication, but I think we also get those from book publishers as well. And so some book publishers are more prestigious, are more rigorous than others. Some book publishers will ask you to pay up money upfront to have them publish your book, which is a red flag. You want to make sure that whatever publisher you approach and pursue has a process where they an arm's length review process where there are referees, and you can suggest referees, as Lori suggests. It's important to suggest names to publishers of folks who can kind of competently review your work in a kind of sympathetic way. But you want to make sure that there is some kind of referee process involved. Because at the end of the day, that's what tenure and promotion committees are really kind of concerned about. That's the kind of gold standard. And so I would really encourage you, if you're uncertain about the quality of a certain publisher or the status of a certain publisher, I would talk to your colleagues about their experiences. Talking to your colleagues about their experience with a certain publisher or a certain editor also goes a long way, you know. So in some ways, you know, you might aim for a high prestige press, but the editor may not be that on the ball and may not be as committed to your project as you would like, and that can be a problem. So it's always worth talking to friends and colleagues about their experiences with editors, presses, and checking with, you know, your department chair or whoever about whether, you know, a press that you may not have heard of or may not be familiar with how it's regarded in the wider kind of academic community. Maybe I'll stop there and turn it over to Lori.
Yeah, Lori, over to you.
Sure, thank you very much. So to students who are trying to publish in a journal, especially an international journal, because I noticed that question has come up in the chat, you need to think about an international audience, because you know, 10% of the time I'd be rejecting papers that were just about Canada because it was hard for me to understand the international appeal or application of the data. So thinking about, and it's hard, right? When you, especially if your research is really focused on Canada and you're new, and you might not understand the international field so much, but thinking about like what it is that your findings can help other people learn outside of Canada. I think this piece of advice applies for many of the people who are on the call, because you'll be doing single country studies. And so for a journal like Jimmy, you want to make sure that it has some sort of international appeal in some regard or other. Picking up from Vic's point, having a trusted colleague or your supervisor proofread your article before it goes out is highly beneficial because no one's a perfect writer. And I think everybody can polish up the way they articulate their messages. And so having others read for you before you submit the article, I think increases your chances of getting past the desk reject stage at least. The other thing I want to tell you is that co-authoring is an awesome way to get into publishing. So the single authored paper, they're more rare these days. Even professors are not single authoring papers. We're parts of big grants that have multiple people. And so if you are able to situate yourself on a research project as a junior scholar and having the ability to publish with somebody else, that helps you get your foot in the door so that when it's time for you to do your own individual publishing, you've had a little bit of experience. And just from my perspective, as being a professor for 20 years, I very rarely see single authored papers anymore. But I do see my junior colleagues struggle because they think that they've got to get single authored papers out, when in fact, actually, it's much easier. There's the idea that more eyes on a subject and more writers on a subject can actually be a better thing. I also want you to think about the time periods of submitting your paper. So when I was a journal editor, I used to get a barrage of papers in May because that's when American and Canadian scholars were just finishing up the semester. In Europe, it's usually June. And so people, they want to go on holidays and they want to get their paper out before holiday season. I'm going to get a ton of papers in May, June, and July. I'm also going to get a barrage of papers at the end of August. That's when Canadians are getting ready to go back to work, and September, which is when the Americans and the Europeans are getting ready to go back to work. So being aware that if you submit your paper during those time periods, it's going to take a little while to get a review back because everybody's just busy or on holidays. The other kind of mini busy time period is December, January. Also to do with the semester system, right? So seems like the end of semesters, everybody wants to submit and then nobody wants to review. So if you're asked to review an article, actually, that's a great opportunity for you to learn about what's going on in the field, but also to perfect your own writing too. Because then you have an idea of what to be looking for in a good article so that when it's your turn to publish a good article, you'll know what to do. I think I've already mentioned taking the rejections as an opportunity to learn. I think that's the biggest mistake that all of us make. If we get rejected, we feel like this paper is no good, when in fact, the paper's probably good. It just needs a little bit of tweaking, a little bit of changing, probably isn't very straightforward in what it wants to say. So use the desk rejection as a chance to revise and a chance to resubmit to a different journal, but in making sure that you've actually spent time reworking the paper so it actually does make sense. It's hard to get a desk rejection. It is, but like I said, it's a part of life. Everybody gets rejected, and you just have to take that as a learning experience. I also want to just caution you again about the issue of predatory journals, because they're out there and they prey on students. So they send you this flowery letter. They even might call you doctor if you're not a doctor. And they'll say to you, we just read your dissertation and it's awesome. And we want to publish this. And then they put the name of this journal that you've never heard of. And then they might ask you for some money to publish it. Or as Vic said too, they might ask you, they might offer to print your dissertation as a book. Do not fall for this. Because they try to love you up in the email that they send to you. When in reality they're trying to make money off of you. And if you publish in these predatory journals, it looks really bad on your CV because if you're looking for a job, the people who are shortlisting you for the job applications, they'll be looking at the quality of the journal and the quality of the publisher. And if you're publishing with some of these kind of risky companies, you're probably going to get rejected. And be aware, conferences do this all the time. They'll do things like, oh, the University of Oxford, we're going to have this conference at the University of Oxford, but unless you read the fine print will say, University of Oxford is we're allowing you to use our space, but we don't support this conference. And I've had students who've fallen for that in the past too. They're like, I got an invitation to Harvard and I'm going to give this paper at Harvard and it's so awesome. But it's so, you see the letter and you can totally, like, Harvard's not emailing you. They're not even emailing me. And so you have to be really suspicious when you get these email because they feel so authentic. And it's such a kick in the butt when you find out that they're not authentic and actually can do your reputation more harm than good. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today about publishing because when I was a student, actually, I would have really have loved to learn a few things because publishing seemed to be like one of these mysterious things that, my professors who floated up in the air used to do. So thank you for listening to us today.
Thank you, Lori. So let's move on to the Q&A section. And we've been noticing that some of you have already posted several questions. So what I'm going to do is to put several questions together and ask Vic and Lori to see if they're glad to pick and choose some of the questions. So just to summarize a few questions posted online so far. The first question was about these pros and cons of writing a book versus a couple of, I assume like publishing a couple of articles from your dissertation. That's something that Vic already touched upon earlier, so maybe you already addressed it, but if you have something more to add, feel free to chime in. And another question was, is it advantageous, when it comes to publishing PhD research, is it more advantageous to publish it as a book or in smaller increments across different journals? Again, this is something that Vicky already mentioned as well. And finally, another question was, is there any list? Can you think of any list of Canadian journals that publish quantitative research and or research on migration and health? Maybe this question can be something that Lori is more kind of interested to answer. But Vic, do you want to chime in any other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I think I already spoke to it, but maybe I'll just say one or two more things. I think in terms of a strategy, I'm a big fan of killing two birds with one stone. And so I don't think there's anything wrong or unethical about taking, one or two of your best chapters in your manuscript and working them up and transforming them into journal articles. They're not going to be like verbatim. And so obviously you have to use the material that you're using for your book chapter. And you have to work it up into a journal article, which is different. And so I think it's worth investing that time and trying to get, one or maybe two journal articles based on chapters in your book out before the book comes out. And the timing is actually kind of important. So it's kind of expected and normal for the journal articles to come out before your book is published, but not the other way around. So once your book is published, it's a problem and not really acceptable for you to try and publish a chapter out of the book as a journal article, so kind of works one way but not the other. So if you are going to pursue that strategy, get the journal articles out first, and then use those as the basis for your chapters, but not the other way around, because the journals will be very unhappy about that. So publishers have a little bit more kind of tolerance for the other process. So I think the timing issue you want to pay attention to. But again, there's nothing unethical or unreasonable about doing that. And in fact, I would strongly encourage you to do that, so that, you know, you're building up your CV in terms of referee journal articles, but then once your book comes out, it just adds that much value to it. So that's maybe all I'll add there.
Lori, do you have any responses to some of the questions?
Sure. To the question about health and migration journals, it's actually hard for me to give you because I don't know the topic of your paper. So, and I also don't know why you're being rejected. So I'm only just guessing here, not knowing your topic. Like maybe your topic is too Canada focused, and that's why you can't get into a US or a UK journal. It could be that you're in that top 20% of articles, but they can only publish 10% of the articles that they receive. So it's not necessarily bad what you're writing. It just doesn't reach the potential of the articles that are accepted, which is a message that might be hard to hear. I mean, because you've spent all this time and energy working so hard to do this research, and to be told, well, it's not good enough. And it's some of these journals are incredibly difficult to get a hold into. I was asked to write a paper for the Canadian Medical Association Journal, and I tagged with several physicians. We wrote it together, and we still got rejected. But that's the way it goes. It's just that they can't publish everything that they receive. So my advice to you with regards to health and migration journals is you might want to try the Canadian Review of Sociology, because they do, if it's a really sociology paper, they publish around all of the topics of sociology and allow you to talk about Canada exclusively. You don't have to be international, you just have to be Canadian. The Canadian Sociological Review is also another journal that you could try to publish in. It's a very Canadian-centric journal, and it's a sociology journal. You can also try the Canadian Ethnic Studies Association Journal, because they do publish quantitative research as well as qualitative research too. So reaching up to the qualitative researchers there too. But I share your pain, but you have to just keep trying and listening to the rejections too. Like, why are they rejecting you?
Thanks to you both. So now, yeah, I would say both Vic and Lori addressed the several questions addressed on the chat box. So now we still have about 20 minutes before the end of the webinar. So for the audience who are tuning in, if you are interested to address questions to the panelists like verbally, I highly encourage you to raise your hand using this Zoom's icon. And then I think Sherry is able to unmute you. So if you want to speak, if you want to ask questions to the panelists, feel free to raise your hand. And in the meantime, I see another question addressed by the audience posted on the chat box. So this question is, what is the importance of positionality in publishing? Vic, can you comment on this?
That's a very good question. Um, How should I answer that? I've over the years, I've written about many topics and groups and issues that I don't have a personal connection to. My dissertation, my PhD dissertation was about how the federal government responded to lobbying by farmers and Caribbean government officials to allow workers from Mexico and the Caribbean to come to Canada to work under a seasonal agricultural workers program. So I'm a complete outsider there. My book, Points of Entry, was about how these officers make decisions. I'm a complete outsider there. I was and am interested in the Ukrainian diaspora. I'm a bit of an ambivalent insider there, insofar as my parents were refugees from Ukraine that arrived in Canada after the Second World War. And so that's probably the one project where I was kind of more talking about myself or a community that I have some affiliation with. I'm a white man. I don't know if that gives me less authority or more authority when I write. That's a good question. I've thought about that a lot, actually, and I don't have a great answer. I think there's something to be said for being an outsider. The insider-outsider kind of dilemma that we all face with our research. There are benefits to being an insider in the communities that we study because it can provide special access or insight into dynamics and so on. So I think that's possible and that's positive. But I think there's also something to be said for being an outsider and having an outsider perspective on different issues, whether that gives someone more credibility or authority. I don't know, but again, I'm just speaking from experience. So my dissertation, which I finished in 1988, before many of you were born, and which came out as a book in 1991, I've actually revisited the data and the book this summer for an affidavit that I was asked to prepare for a $500 million class action lawsuit that some lawyers are filing on behalf of migrant workers. And so the fact that I don't have a necessary stake, that's an important way to put it, that I'm not I don't know if being an outsider gives me more authority or not in that. I guess we'll have to wait and see once the government lawyers cross-examine me. So it's a great question, and sorry I don't have a great answer, but it's something I think about.
Lori, do you have any response, any comments on this question about the positionality in publishing?
I think we do have to think about our positionality, irregardless of whether we're quantitative or qualitative researchers, because we're all looking at our data and our results using our eyes, right? Like we have a lens through which we view things. And so as a white female who, her family's been in Canada for about 4 generations, most sides, not all sides, and thinking about my position, how my position has changed as well. Like I went from a low income family who didn't have any who went to university to now a university professor. So I've jumped a few income brackets. But that's a viewpoint that is really different from my colleagues and from my students who tend to be newcomers themselves. They're younger than me. Maybe they're from different income brackets. Part of that discussion about positionality comes with, like, because we publish as a group, thinking about our different positionalities and how they intertwine with one another, but also where our lenses might be kind of partially blinded, right? Because we don't have everybody's viewpoint. It's a long-winded way of saying we need to think about our positionality in how we're writing our papers, and then think very critically about how this might affect what data we find is important and what data we think is less important, and making sure that we don't impose our viewpoints or our way of seeing things on top of the data that we've collected.
Sorry. So I think we covered all the questions on the chat box. So if any of you has any other questions, I think that's the end of this is the end of the webinar. And feel free to some of you may not be members of the social migration cluster, but if you have any suggestions for upcoming webinar that are probably more focusing toward professional development related themes, feel free to make recommendations to our social migration cluster email address, which is available on the CSA migration cluster website. Like, I don't have the exact email address right now, but you should be able, or if you could email the office at csa/cs.ca, Sherry may be able to direct you to the social migration cluster's central email address. So feel free to give us any suggestions as well as feedback on today's webinar. Again, thanks for taking the time to attend our first social migration cluster webinar. I hope to see you again in the next in upcoming months, upcoming terms. So see you soon. Bye.